Okay, so hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about work and retirement from the perspective of, an older adult. And we're going to draw heavily from, gerontology and occupational psychology. This topic especially is important as our population ages. And it's especially interesting to me because I have actually had the opportunity, and one of my areas of expertise is to manage older adult workforces. And so a lot of what we're going to discuss today, I've witnessed all of the different reasons why people continue to work, why people need to work. I have actually had the opportunity to talk to older adults about. And then we have, a lot of people are actually working well into their 60s and 70s. I've had some people into their 80s. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, older adults are now one of the fastest growing segments of the labor force. So at the same time, retirement patterns are totally changing. People are retiring earlier than in the past, but many also live for like decades beyond retirement, creating new financial and lifestyle challenges. So, we're going to look at the age-related trends in work, job performance, timing, and experience of retirement. There's some gender differences, of course, income and adjustment, and the way older adults stay engaged is also interesting. So they do it through work, volunteering, and different living arrangements. We're also going to examine a couple of real case scenarios to bring these concepts to life. So by the end, you're going to have a deeper understanding of how older adults navigate work and retirement and the factors that shape their decisions. So, and what supports like a successful aging or retirement or post-work life. All right, so we're going to take a look at age trends and work experience. But before we do, let's take a look at that grid that's up in the top right. And so this is going to go over whether, if will your job skills decline as you age? And will performance improve? Can it improve with experience? So are you able to compensate for over, some of those changes that happen with age? So in the, let's take an example of like an assembly line worker who just that isn't in a job that's very physically demanding. Maybe it's just like putting some piece parts together. You're going to have people who are able to work for a very long, you know, periods of time. So for, excuse me, long into their later years, really, because it's something that they've, been able to really remember. They're drawing on their crystallized memory to be able to keep doing the work that they're doing. So they're it's like highly practiced skills that they're leaning on to be able to continue doing that work. So another type of role, let's think about like a surgeon. A surgeon, yes, he is going to have some decline with age, so maybe his dexterity will decline, but he has gained knowledge and experience that helps to compensate for that decline. So he is able to continue to work and be very successful in his role. An area where, there is yes, definitely a decline with age and job skills, and that you cannot compensate through, that you really can't compensate for is like a construction worker. So it's very physically demanding. So as you age, you're not able to pick up the same amount of weight or stand on your feet for the same amount of hours and do that kind of work. So it doesn't matter how much you know about that job, you just can't physically do it any longer. So that's how you read that chart there. So that's basically telling us that, there is a way to that a lot of older adults are able to compensate for the work that they're doing, for the changes in that are happening because of age, and keep doing the work that they've been doing for a long time without a reduction in performance. And in fact, a lot of the myths and stereotypes that we believe today, that a lot of people believe about older adults, are completely untrue. And I think they go into that in the textbook, and we're going to discuss that a little bit more right now. But that chart is just telling you basically what, like crystallized and how crystallized and highly practiced abilities can compensate for age-related decline and other abilities on the job. So there are two areas where people often hold incorrect assumptions about older workers. And I have to say that I've encountered this personally. One of my areas of expertise is actually managing older adult workforces. So this is not volunteers, although I've managed volunteers that are older adults as well. But it's actually I've managed seniors, older adults who were employed and paid employees and worked in teams of older adults. And they were the fear. It was hard to get them the job, to get actual authorization from the company to hire more, because there was always the concern about them being sick too often, and that was going to cause increased absenteeism. Worried that they weren't going to be able to learn how to use computers, or that they wouldn't know how to use computers to do the job that needed to be done. Lots of other things, reasons what they would give, but they turned out to be incorrect. And so a lot of assumptions that they were making about older adult workers were just wrong. So first of all, job performance. So the research in EBER indicates that job performance does not decline with age, and definitely it doesn't. In fact, older adult workers frequently outperform younger workers in key ways. They have much lower turnover, meaning they stay in their jobs longer. They are more satisfied with it, so they don't have a reason to leave. They also have fewer avoidable absences. So rather than having increased absenteeism, they have reduced absenteeism. They have also, they're more careful on the job, so they have significantly lower rates of workplace injuries. And it's partially because of their experience. So they are experienced at their job, and they, are careful of what they're doing. They know what they're doing, basically, so they're less likely to injure themselves. I think an important part about this is the self-selection idea. So they've already, one of the things that older adults have most likely already done is, by that stage in their life, they're in a job that they have self-selected. So they've left jobs that they didn't like, and now they're in a role that is appealing to them. So it's going to be more satisfying. They're going to, perform better. It's a better fit for their abilities and their strengths. But still, age-related stereotypes persist, especially around technology use, as I said, or learning new systems. However, research shows that older adults can learn technology very effectively. And I created courses personally to teach new employees how to use computer systems, how to use automated dialer systems to call large volumes of other members, other older adults, to provide assistance on many different subjects, things like that. And they were definitely able to learn how to use all the systems and were very effective. So the training, I had to make sure that it was paced well for their, it was properly paced for their learning speed. It was designed with how they were going to be using the system. So I did not train them on all of how the system, all the things the system could do, which would be pretty interesting to me. But I trained them on what they would actually need to use to do their job. So really focused training on that. And then it was repetition, of course. So I was thinking about usability in mind. And in the workforce, older adults compensate for changes in their processing speed. So with experience, anticipation, and strategy, what Baltz and Baltz describes as selective optimization with compensation, it's a model that we've discussed before, but it explains how people maintain performance even with normal aging challenges. So now let's transition over to job satisfaction. Older adults tend to be more satisfied with their jobs than younger workers. And why is that? Well, one reason is because of a selective attrition. So self-selection, I mentioned it just a moment ago, but people who, dislike their jobs tend to be younger, and they're leaving their jobs earlier in life. So, when you're younger, you're leaving the jobs that you don't like. And while those who stay long term, typically it's because they're enjoying what they're doing or their skills are well aligned with what they're doing. So by the time workers reach midlife or later in life, they often have like clearer expectations about what the job a job should be like, and they're more stable in their positions and a better fit. Again, their skills are better aligned with the work that they're being asked to do, and they've self-selected, so now they have chosen to be in that career. So another explanation is psychological. So older adults tend to have more realistic expectations about work. So they're less focused on like rapid advancement. That's not their priority. They're not trying to move up the career ladder. And they're more focused on meaningful relationships. So when I manage the older adult workforces, one of the things that was extremely important to make sure they had good job satisfaction was to have a lot of opportunities for them to engage with each other. So lunches, um, picnics together, things that I think all companies do for their employees. It would just be at a much more frequent pace or a frequent cadence. So we would have a lot of opportunities for them to meet, meetings where they all got to discuss things together. And then ultimately, they would end up becoming friends and being very supportive of each other outside of the work setting because the relationships were so important to them. And all of that led to greater productivity. So they need to feel like they have a purpose in the job and that they're making a contribution. So also managing these teams, I had to make sure that they were very clear on how the work that they were doing made a difference for the company. So that was a message that I constantly had to give them in order to help them feel like they were satisfied. So if they felt that they were not contributing to the company, I would hear about it. So Eber emphasizes that older adults often have like stronger emotional investments in their roles, and they feel more committed to the organization. So that's really important to them. So the key takeaway here is that older workers bring stability, experience, and strong performance to the workplace, traits that are increasingly valuable as organizations face labor shortages and demographic shifts. So I think that's one of the most important messages that I would try to provide to the companies that I've worked for is that they could serve to provide that stability. They could be great mentors to younger folks. They would be great examples because they are more reliable, stable, have a great attitude. So they kind of create an environment that is really good for the company. So, having older adults on the workforce, I think is extremely important and very valuable. So here we're looking at retirement timing and the changing patterns across history in the United States. So the current median retirement age is about 61. Um, I haven't checked, the exact numbers this year actually, so I have to do that. It might have shifted a little bit, but it's about 61, and the average is about 62. Full retirement under Social Security now has actually increased. So it was 65, and I think for me it is 67 or 67 and a half, something like that. I mean, what's fascinating here is that now people are living decades longer. So you're having people live much longer lives, but people are retiring earlier. So that kind of poses uh, a challenge for our society in terms of how are we going to pay for our retirement years. We really don't have enough in retirement now, especially certain groups don't have enough in retirement savings now to pay for ourselves. But like, how are we going to pay for ourselves or pay for these extra years if we're retiring early? And so, like the Social Security system, for example, was not built with this in mind. It was built with the idea that people would work late into their 60s, and they weren't really the lifespan was not much longer than that. So, um, that's why you hear a lot about the trouble that Social Security is in and the reform that has to be made in order to um, safeguard Social Security for future generations. But in terms of like who is actually retiring at these earlier ages, there's two predominant groups. The first is the people who are really in poor health, who have those that have low income, or those who are underemployed or unemployed to begin with. So some people who just can't find employment, or you have folks who actually it's not financially feasible for them to find employment. It could be that like actually having a part-time job or having working with their level of skill set or background, the type of job that they would have would be more costly than the it would actually would pay less than the cost it would take for them to uh, be able to make it to work, to have a car, or maybe they need to hire a caregiver for their loved one who is at home that needs um, support. So it just doesn't make sense for them to work. So that's the one group. And the other group is like the other end of the spectrum. We're talking about people who are in really good health. They have above average incomes and they have pension plans. So these are the folks who, you know, retire early because they can afford to do it. And in some cases, they just want more years of leisure and more time to travel. So it's not like they're going to retire and then do nothing. It's that they want to pursue more um, interests, personal interests. Um, but you know, health is actually one of the strongest predictors of early retirement, and that comes up again and again in lots of research studies and a lot of that health is that predictor, good or bad, really good health and really poor health. So who is retiring early? Well, it's mostly actually white men because they are the ones that tend to have um, the above average incomes. They have the pension plans, things like that. So historically, they've had access to the jobs that have those benefits. Um, they have the employer-based retirement benefits. They've had careers that offer those types of benefits, where women are less likely, and especially women of color. Women tend to be to have jobs more than they have careers. And that has a lot to do with, the gender roles and the expectations for women as caregivers. So they, enter and exit the workforce more frequently because of the caregiver expectations. So they really can't have a career per se. So they would have a job, and jobs don't have the same types of benefits that a career would have. So, this kind of sets the stage for our understanding about the complexities about retirement decisions. And we're going to explore these a little bit further in the following slides. So retirement decisions are not easy for anyone. They're not simple. I recall actually creating at one of the companies that I worked for, I created a program to teach people who are about to retire about the benefits that existed, government benefits, and the different options for coverage for like healthcare after you retired. And I would bring people together and that were interested in learning like how to make that transition. And what I would find is that they'd spend a lot of their time, like all of the people, these are small group settings usually, those people would spend time talking about the difficulties or the questions they had or the concerns that they had about their transition to retirement from working. So they weren't always sure about what it would be like to retire. They wanted to hear from somebody who'd already retired what their experience had been like. So it's like I said, it's just not simple. And there's a lot of interacting factors that go into this. The strongest predictor, as I mentioned on the last slide, is health. So when health declines, physical or cognitive demands of work become more difficult, right? So pushing people into early retirement happens because of that. It is especially common in physically demanding and low control jobs. I mentioned construction workers as an example earlier. So wealth and financial readiness also play a major role in the decision to retire. People with a lot of savings and investments or pensions, they can choose to retire earlier because they can afford to do so. Those with limited resources often have to continue to work just out of necessity so that they continue to pay the bills. So age itself is also a predictor. So not because age causes retirement, but because people become eligible for Social Security and Medicare as they age. So making retirement actually feasible for some folks. Although that's becoming less and less the case, and we'll go over that again in a future slide. But another reason for retirement is caregiving responsibilities. I mentioned that on the last slide. So you may have, it may be more expensive to hire a caregiver than to just do it yourself. So, but caregiving responsibilities are another major factor, especially for women. Again, the gender role plays a factor here. Adults may retire early to take care of their spouses, their parents, even their grandchildren. So I think I've mentioned this in the past that a lot of older adults now are actually raising their grandchildren either because the parents or their adult children have lost custody of the children, or they are working and they need extra support at the daycare and they can't afford daycare for their children, things like that. So Eber notes that caregiving is one of the most common reasons why women have to interrupt and or or end their careers. So that leads to long-term financial implications. So even with Social Security is based on your top 10 earning years. So if you're constantly having to like leave the workforce, even if you go back into it, if you have to leave again, you're just not going to have the same earnings as someone who's consistently been in the workforce for many years, right? So you're like restarting your career each time. You're going to be starting at the bottom, of the ladder again. So that means lower pay. So a woman's top 10 years, paid years, is going to be much lower than a man's top 10 paid years. That's not even considering that women, to begin with, are earning much less than, there's the women's wealth gap, of course, where women are earning like 79 cents. I'm not sure if this is like the data like today, but about 79 cents to every dollar that a man earns. So there's that disparity as well. So those are some of those long-term financial implications. So next, work characteristics matter. So individuals who are self-employed have higher autonomy, or they find their work is deeply meaningful. So they can keep working longer. They will retire later because they're enjoying the work that they do. They don't see a reason to stop. Conversely, workers in physically demanding, monotonous, or low control jobs often retire as soon as they can financially do so. So again, as soon as they get those Social Security benefits, they're out of there. So finally, leisure pursuits often influence retirement timing. So people want to be able to do the things that they like while they can still do them. So people with active hobbies or travel plans, they don't want to wait until they're in their 80s and can no longer physically actually play tennis or pickleball or whatever it is that they enjoy doing. So it becomes much harder to travel as you age as well. So they want to retire when they can still do those things. So they may have a very strong social network, and so they want to spend more time with friends and family. So they're more likely to retire early because they have something that's fulfilling outside of work. So their reason for being isn't work alone. Altogether, retirement is best understood as a process shaped by health, wealth, caregiving, job type, and lifestyle goals. So when we examine retirement through a gendered lens, we see significant differences in patterns, timing, and experiences. So women are generally less likely to plan for retirement, not because they can't or they won't, which means they often have less saved. So this is not due to their lack of interest or, again, financial capabilities. It's largely the result of structural factors. So wage gaps, I mentioned the wealth gap. They are more often in part-time employment. They have lower access to employer-based pension plans. They spend more years outside of the workforce, providing unpaid caregiving, which is very valuable and very expensive if you were to hire someone. But again, it's unpaid. And women also retire for different reasons than men do. So they are far more likely to leave the workforce for family-related reasons. For example, they need to care for their children's or grandchildren, aging parents. So if even aging the parents of their spouse, they're more likely to leave the workforce than the actual child of the aging parent. So additionally, women are more likely to retire when their husbands retire. So they want to be able to do all those leisure activities with their husband or with their spouse when they retire. So it just reflects traditional household dynamics or shared planning. So because many women spend fewer total years in paid employment, they often have shorter or interrupted contribution histories, as I mentioned before, to Social Security and retirement accounts. So they may not have contributed the full 10 years that they needed to achieve the full benefits under Social Security, or every time they restarted their career that they left and went back in, their earnings were really low. So their 10 highest earning years were actually pretty low compared to a male's highest 10 earning years. So however, women tend to live longer, so often like decades beyond retirement. So as a result, retirement can be one of the longest stages of life for women, actually. So for example, a woman who works for 20, 25 years may live for another 30 years in retirement. This increases exposure to risks such as poverty, widowhood, or high medical costs, so yes, women definitely are the higher percentage of women are living in poverty than men. And these gender differences show how important it is to understand retirement, not just as an individual financial decision, but also as a life course issue influenced by social norms, caregiving, and inequality. So research shows that retirement for most adults does not lead to major declines in health, activity, or emotional well-being. In fact, many people report stable or even improved psychological health after leaving the workforce, which is great because people, before leaving, they're really worried about what it's going to be like when they leave. But they find that depression often decreases, especially for those that are retiring from very high stress or very inflexible jobs. However, about 15% of retirees have significant difficulty adjusting. So these individuals may struggle with like loss of structure, reduced social interaction. I have seen individuals who really on their own they weren't outgoing enough to be able to make social connections outside of a structured setting like either a school or work. So they were very lonely. So having the work setting, and again, I mentioned earlier that I would create a lot of social opportunities for employees. That helped those individuals that outside of that structure really weren't outgoing enough to be able to make their own connections. So leaving the workforce creates a huge gap for folks who don't have like those skills to build those relationships. And to be honest, by that stage in life, it's going to be hard for most people to build new relationships. So there's reduced social interaction that happens, so that people struggle with that. There's financial strain. There is less flexibility in your finances, right? So when you're younger, you always have, and you're working before retirement, although you may be struggling financially, there's always the opportunity to work more. There's the feeling like you can find another job, or you can find a different job and just earn more income. You have the potential. But once you're retired, you have fixed income. That potential is pretty much gone. So there's a financial strain, and a lot of people have their identity tied to work. So I know I actually do myself. I feel very fulfilled by work. So it's something I'll have to watch as I get older. But they once they lose that, they lose their sense of self. So Eber cites studies demonstrating that adjustment depends largely on whether retirement is voluntary and aligns with their personal goals. So if people are forced retired, they are kind of made to leave the company, they're not going to be as satisfied. So some key factors influencing successful adjustment include, of course, good health. Good physical and mental health are important. Having enough income, I mentioned that over and over. Being able to have an active lifestyle, I think again ties to physical health. Higher education tends to be a great predictor of whether or not you're able to have a good transition into retirement. But I think that correlates a lot with the wealth, because the higher education you have, the more likely you are to have invested into retirement plans, et cetera, or to have a type of a career that offers retirement benefits from an employer. A strong social network, so you already have friends, family that provide meaningful relationship that is a positive relationship. So previous satisfaction with life. So if they've been happy their whole life, they're most likely to continue to be pleased and happy with their life post-retirement. Another concept here is the busy ethic. So that refers to the tendency for retirees to translate their work ethic into other productive activities. So things like volunteering, caregiving, hobbies, community engagement, or part-time work. We would jokingly say to a lot of the volunteers that I worked with in the past, because many of the jobs that I've held involved volunteers, and of course, the greatest number of volunteers, greatest number of our volunteers would come from seniors because they were retired. We would tell them that they were more busy, or they would joke that they were more busy in retirement than they actually were when they were working, and that's because they were spending so much time volunteering and community engagement. They tend to be very, very I think older adults who've lived in their community for a long time feel a lot of responsibility, are very tied to their community. So they want to make a difference. So they engage in the community quite a bit, and they volunteer and in part-time work. So they are transferring all of that energy and work that they were doing pre-retirement into other activities post-retirement. So people who maintain purpose and structure, they tend to be better off in retirement. So overall, retirement is less about like withdrawing and more about reorganization. So replacing work roles with meaningful, fulfilling activities. And that's going to create a better experience for folks post-retirement. So when people transition from work to retirement, the income sources shift dramatically. Most retirees live on approximately about 85 to 100% of their pre-retirement income, so their income is not as high as when they were working. But also the composition changes. So employment income disappears. Well, not entirely for everyone, but pretty much disappears. And Social Security becomes the primary source of income, especially for middle and lower income retirees. That's their primary source of income. Historically, financial planners encourage people to use a three-legged stool model, and in fact, now they're saying the four-legged stool model, in which they want you to have Social Security as one of the legs. They want you to have like a pension, assets as another. So those are the three legs, but the fourth one would now be working. So planners are encouraging people to work as long as they can, ideally in a job that they like, so that if any of those legs at any point were to be taken out, for example, if Social Security were to be would disappear, then you would still have a stool that can stand. So they would still, I think theoretically, an older adult would still be able to support themselves because they have the other three legs of the stool. So I'm not sure that a part-time job is going to be able to provide enough income to, I think, compensate for what Social Security was providing, but I think that that's kind of the concept around it. If you look at the chart here, you'll notice that it's actually quite a few people, almost the same amount, the percentage of income that goes into retirement or post-retirement income or income source is actually earnings, and 33% is Social Security. So each year the private and government pensions shrinks, and actually we're seeing a pretty big increase in earnings as a source of income for older adults. We mentioned already in another slide, older adults are kind of the fastest growing labor force. So I think that's good and bad, again, especially if you are doing it by choice, not by force. So I think this is very dynamic, this chart. It changes a lot, and so I think if you look back a few decades, you'll see that the earnings were much lower. So you had a lot more people that had Social Security as their source of retirement, and of course private pensions. So unfortunately, those are not as common now as they used to be. So Social Security here, some of the things that people rely on for their retirement, again, is their pensions or 401ks. They have their personal savings. And again, that four-legged model stool is being encouraged by financial planners as a way to kind of anticipate or think ahead for what maybe if Social Security were to change in the future. So that your stool can continue to stand. So focusing on poverty, inequality, and the uneven economic impact of retirement. So while retirees typically maintain 85 to 100% of their pre-retirement income, this stability is not universal. So about 1 in 5 older adults rely solely on Social Security, and without that benefit, nearly 1/3 of older adults would fall below the poverty line. So poverty is more common among minorities and women. Women's longer lifespans is one of the reasons. Wage gaps, their caregiver interruptions, lower pension access, all increase their financial vulnerability. So it makes them more vulnerable to poverty. This is referred to as the gendering of poverty. So meaning that poverty disproportionately affects women, especially older women and widows and women of color. And so when I say widows, look at the life expectancy of women versus men. We know that women have a higher life expectancy. So you would expect to see quite a few widows. And so they're unfortunately more at risk for poverty. And so understanding these disparities really underscores the need for better retirement planning. I'm not sure about the four-legged stool, but something needs to happen. So I think stronger Social Security, social support system needs to be put in place. There needs to be reform and policies that address lifetime earnings inequality. So you may have watched the TED Talk video that is posted for this week as well. I think that gives you really good insight into how gender leads to income inequality and how that can affect life, and also talks a little bit about what can be done about it and how it'll be hard, but it can definitely be changed. So retirement is no longer a one-size-fits-all type of trajectory. Many older adults pursue alternatives to full retirement. So some shun retirement entirely, they either by choice or by force, they may enjoy the work that they're doing. They feel a strong sense of purpose. They are just as productive as they have always been. They don't lack savings, so or if they do lack savings, they want to keep working for that reason. So they shun retirement entirely. Others pursue second careers. So often in a field that is more flexible or mission driven or aligned with personal passions. A lot of the older adult workforces, or the older adults that I've worked with before, this is what they were doing. They were pursuing a second career. We worked, the company that they worked for, or the companies that they worked for, the fields that they worked in prior to coming to work at the company where we worked together, was entirely different field, much more stressful fields usually, and less flexible. And one of the big perks of working in our workforce was that I provided a lot of flexibility. So they would make their schedule. They had to commit to a schedule, but they would make the schedule. So it would work around their time. Part-time. It would be part-time often. And I mentioned that they had to understand the purpose and how they were contributing to the goals of the organization. So they also had to work, understand the mission of the organization clearly. So it's like a constant reminder of what the mission is, and that there was a mission, and that mission was important in helping in some way. So not that it was just earning income or earnings. A growing number of retirees move into like kind of nonprofit or community-based work. So they want to help people. Part-time work is extremely common. So nearly half of retired men work part-time at some point. So whether for additional income, structure, or social engagement, it's a great place to meet new people, to find a new job that is part-time. So the key message here is that, excuse me, it's never too early to start planning for retirement, whether it's financially, emotionally, and socially. So for a retirement that fits your goals and needs, plan as early as you can. So I mentioned that in addition to working with older adult workforces, I also managed volunteers that were mostly older adults because they had the time to volunteer. So volunteering actually plays a significant role in the lives of many older adults. So roughly 40% of older adults are involved in structure volunteering. Actually, the volunteer positions that I managed in the past were like part-time jobs. They had a lot of responsibilities. They were very structured, so it wasn't they had to have schedules. They came in at certain times. They had to complete paperwork or forms like a job. It was like a job, and they had expectations like they were a job, but they were volunteering their time to do it. Excuse me. While the remaining 60% can kind of engage in less formal, more flexible forms of volunteering, like for example, caregiving. They might be doing some mentoring. It might provide some occasional community assistance. So older adults tend to prefer serving groups that feel meaningful. So that was one of my greatest learnings, is that whether or not they were needed to work, if they had to make money because they didn't have enough in retirement, or for whatever reason, the work still had to be meaningful. So they didn't tolerate staying at a company as long, because if the work wasn't meaningful, as maybe a younger person could, and that sort of a thing. Well, I don't know if that's correct. I would say more that they would um, stay, but they were less likely to tolerate and not say anything about it. They were more likely to speak up about how, they were unhappy if something didn't feel meaningful. So the very young and the very old, those are or those with serious illness. Those are the ones that older adults tend to prefer to serve. they kind of focus on those with the greatest need. So volunteering provides also social connection. I think in another chapter we explored the value, how important social connection is to health and well-being. So volunteering is a very important uh, way to get that social connection. It also gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of identity that you may have lost because you are no longer working, your identity was tied to work, all of which support healthy aging. So, however, research warns that benefits do decline when volunteering is forced. So, if somebody is kind of pushed into volunteering, it's not voluntary actually, um, then it's not going to be beneficial. An example would be like court ordered work in the community. That's forced, that's not volunteer, so that's not going to have the same health and well-being benefits as actual volunteering. Volunteerism is one of the strongest contributors to happiness and cognitive engagement in later life. So it's a great way also to maintain your cognitive health, which is also correlated with staying socially active. So the last topic I want to discuss is in this lecture is about living situations. So retirement often prompts changes in living arrangements. So older adults make several different types of moves. The first one here you see listed is amenity moves. So these are typically motivated by climate. So I think one of the stereotypes is you move from New York to Florida, or you move from one of the snowy states up in northern US down to Arizona. I knew a lot of snowbirds that moved from some of the states that had a lot of snow, and they would come during the winter. They would move down to San Diego. So they would move to just warmer climates, places that had better, more scenic, that had better recreation opportunities for them. Those are the amenity moves. And then there are the kinship moves, so where people are relocating to be closer to their families, their children, and those are more common in multi-generational support systems as they grow, actually, I should say. So, people are going to need more care as they age, so they recognize that. So they're moving closer to their family. But also, they can provide more care for like grandchildren. So they might be moving closer to their family members or their children so that they can help support them. And when you go through your career, you may have you have a family that's been like spread across the US. So as people retire, they start to kind of gather up together again. And then you have the institutional move, which is a lot less positive, a lot less welcomed typically. So this is a transition to assisted living or skilled nursing facilities, which most people like to avoid. I think the vast majority of people want to age in place. They want to remain in their homes in the community. They do not want to move into a nursing home or even an assisted living facility. And I've seen some beautiful assisted living facilities, but it's not like their home. So aging in place, reflects familiarity, social ties. So they may still have their friends that are in the community. Or they have loved ones that they've lost that are, that they are reminded of because of, through their home. And there's the environmental press concept. So they have adapted to their home environment and they are able to continue to do the things that they need to do to remain autonomous. And so they have emotional attachment as well to their home. This reminds me of one of the volunteers that I supervised in a program, and his name is Elliot, and he lived in this big, beautiful home in Fullerton. His wife passed away, unfortunately, and he was living alone in this big, beautiful home because his children were obviously grown. They all had their own homes, and they felt that he should not be alone. They thought he was too lonely, so they all made the decision with him to have him move into an assisted living facility. And I went to visit him there, and it was a beautiful one in Fullerton. it really wasn't that far from the home he had owned for so long with his wife. He would tell me all of the time how depressed he felt um, because he had lost his home. He missed his home. He wanted to go back to it. It doesn't matter how beautiful the assisted living facility was, it just wasn't his house. Um, it was a little bit like losing his wife again, because a lot of the memories he had with his wife were in that home. Kind of chokes me up a little bit, actually. So, people want to stay in their homes. That's like the number one choice. And there are ways to achieve that. So there are policies and services that can support things like home modifications. Um, Transportation is available. A lot of like the health insurance plans for older adults offer transportation benefits that can get people to the pharmacy, to their doctor's appointments, things like that. There's in-home care that can be paid for, so some people may be able to access that. There's also in-home care that can be obtained through like Medicaid, through Medi-Cal, for people who are low income. And these services are all like crucial for enabling people to remain in their own homes and to be able to age there. And they actually prove to be a lot more cost effective than having people live in nursing facilities. So again, that's, we need to kind of support policies ourselves and vote for officials that support policies that will help keep seniors in their home, because eventually we will want to be able to stay in our own homes, not to live in nursing homes. And, this will benefit us as well as the seniors that are currently facing those decisions. So I mentioned that people are moving from their home to a nursing home but it's not that simple. It's not just, there's actually this continuum of care where there's lots of different levels of care that people can start to receive before they actually are fully dependent and have to be moved into a nursing home, or have to be in a nursing home, or are moved to a nursing home. So an older adult may go from being a fully independent to then again moving through the continuum to being fully dependent. So a continuum of care, which is proposed by Brody, helps us understand the range of living and care options available to older adults. So on the far left is independent living, which is where most older adults start and hope to remain. Not totally possible at all times, but that's where they want to remain. These environments require minimal support and allow for full autonomy. Okay, as needs increase, so ADLs maybe are becoming harder, or IADLs are becoming more difficult, whether due to like physical limitations, chronic illness, cognitive decline. Individuals may transition to may want to bring in supports into their home. So they're able to bring Meals on Wheels programs into their home. So Meals on Wheels is not just for low income, it's actually for any older adults. They do encourage like donations for those who can afford it. It's very cost effective. But so Meals on Wheels exist, and they can provide meals in the home, so that people who are having now difficulty maybe cooking for themselves or shopping for groceries, they can receive that. They can also have, again, I mentioned health insurance companies often offer transportation benefits, which they can access to be able to go to their doctor's appointments, to go to the pharmacy to pick up medications. They can even have medications shipped to their home rather than having to go to a pharmacy. And lots of services that they can bring into the home. They can hire a caregiver that can come in and do, a housekeeper that can come in and do some of the. I guess that will all depend on income, right? On wealth, I should say, on how much income or retirement income that they have. And then there is the daycare facilities. So these are a lot like the concept of childcare facilities. So it's for daytime care. So you have an older adult who can't maybe they live with an adult child, or a caregiver who has to be out of the home during the day. So the older adults can go to this daycare facility during the daytime and be cared for there. And the caregiver who is working would then pick them up after work. So these programs used to, a lot more of them used to exist in the county of Orange even, or nationwide. But they are the first types of programs for older adults that tend to get cut when state budgets get strained. So unfortunately, you don't see quite as many adult daycare centers anymore. But what I am seeing quite a bit of growth in is something called PACE. It's a program of all-inclusive care for the elderly, which is a lot like daycare facilities, except that it's managed through the Medicare program. So these are like daycares for seniors who are low income. Actually, it's open to any seniors, but mostly it's utilized by low income seniors because it's subsidized by Medicare and Medi-Cal. And they go there and they can get physical, they'll have like some physical therapy there. They can even bring dental care in, or they'll take them out to dental care. They have a care team that includes their doctors and nurses and care managers. They'll make sure that they're getting all of the care that they need, all of the health care that they need, and that they're also getting recreational activities during the day, and that all happens at a PACE facility, and that's starting to grow quite a bit, but it is still mostly for people who are low income. And it's unfortunate that the daycare centers get cut because they are so much less expensive than assisted living or nursing homes, which is what are typically funded, self-funded by an individual, so they have to pay out of pocket. Where somebody who's living in a skilled nursing facility, you can get government assistance to pay for that, but it's just extremely, it's like 3 times as expensive for an individual to live in a skilled nursing facility than it is for them to have daycare facilities. But changing the model is so very difficult. So then after daycare facilities, you have assisted living where you need some support. Again, you need support with IADLs, ADLs, but you still are able to do some things independently. So you can live there, and they provide some supports with those daily activities, but you do have some level of independence, and you have the ability to socialize with folks in the assisted living facility. But further along at the very kind of tail end of the continuum there, you have nursing homes, or what are actually called skilled nursing facilities, where individuals are going to get 24-hour care. And most of the staff that is providing that care, you're going to have clinical staff. And it is intensive. And again, not preferred by anyone. So the continuum framework emphasizes that aging is dynamic. So care needs can change over time. You'll see sometimes people move up, to the right on the continuum, and maybe make their way back to the left, but typically they're moving slowly to the right. And so people's needs are changing over time, and the systems have to be flexible enough to support those transitions, while also preserving dignity, autonomy, as much autonomy as possible, and the quality of life, of course, is important. Okay, so here with the chart that we're looking at, so living arrangements by age 65 plus. This chart, the top row is the total population. I'm sorry, I'm looking away here. I have a bigger chart on this side. The second row is the total population that is 65 and older. And then the following 3 lines there are 65 and older broken into smaller age bandwidths. You can see that the darkest purple there is for those that are living in group quarters. The next darkest purple, or a little bit lighter purple there, is those that are living alone. And then you have those that are living with family in a household, and then those living with non-family in a household. And interestingly, you'll see that those that are 85 and older, actually more of them are living alone in a household than you'll see in the other ages. You'll see that fewer of them are actually living with a family member in a household, or living with a non-family member in a household. So I think that has partially to do with the fact that they're outliving a lot of their, they may be outliving a lot of the folks in their social network, so their family or their kin, or they have become very accustomed to their home and they're not going to leave it. So they are living alone in their own house and they've become widowed. So that's another contributing factor there. And you'll see also that those that are 65 and older, you have about 25.9% that are living alone in a household. So anyhow, the chart shows how living arrangements really shift over as adults age. The majority of people who are 65 and older live with a spouse. All right, so that's why such a large percentage of them are living with family in a household. And then only a small percentage reside in an institutional setting, but there's still, a percentage there, 2.5%. All right, and then there's a likelihood of living alone. It increases, as I mentioned, as you get older, and especially for women because they'll become widowed. So they're living in the home with their spouse, and then the spouse passes away and they remain in their home. So again, due to the longer life expectancies. So understanding these patterns is really important because living arrangements influence health outcomes, it influences social isolation, caregiving needs, and risk factors like falls or depression. So you can imagine someone who is living alone in a household who has a fall, that's very dangerous. There may not be someone there to assist them in that instance. So this second chart gives us a little bit more detail by breaking down living arrangements by age and gender. So you see at the top you have men, living arrangements for men. At the bottom you see the living arrangements for women. You'll find that 72% of men are living with a spouse or a partner, where only 48% of women are living with a spouse or a partner. Then you have 21% of men are living alone, where 34% of women, again, kind of going back to the fact that they have longer life expectancies, are more likely to be widows. And 7% of men are in other situations where women are 18%. So again, that kind of explains or depicts the gender differences in housing situations. So as individuals move into their late 80s and 70s, their rate of institutionalization also increases slightly, but still remains like the minority. People want to live in their home and either alone, so they'd rather live alone in their home than go to a nursing facility, or they'd rather live with a family member, but ideally most people want to live in their own home. So this data emphasizes that institutional care is not the default. In fact, aging in place is overwhelmingly like the norm. So you see that again, living with a spouse or partner, that blue is typically in the community, in their home. Okay, so now that we've explored the research patterns and theories behind work and retirement, we're going to shift into 3 case studies. These are real life scenarios that illustrate how individual factors like health, finances, caregiving, social networks, and values can shape retirement decisions. As we move through each case, consider how the themes that we've discussed show up in the lived experiences of different older adults. So in Maria's case, we see a common retirement pattern. We see common retirement pattern among women. So she retired early to care for her grandchildren, a caregiving-driven decision that reflects both cultural expectations and family needs. Because she didn't have a strong retirement plan, she now relies heavily on Social Security, which is the situation for many women, many older women, and life course interruptions such as child rearing and caregiving can reduce lifetime earnings and Social Security benefits. So Maria supplements her income by tutoring part-time, and she demonstrates the growing trend of older adults engaging in part-time or flexible work to remain active, connected, and to remain financially stable. So her case prompts us to consider what structural supports childcare, caregiver credits for Social Security, flexible work could have changed her path. So what may have changed her path? What could have been different to change her path? Now, George illustrates a very different trajectory. He transitioned into a second career as a nonprofit consultant after retiring from his primary job. This kind of encore career, which is what they like to call it, is increasingly common among older adults who have strong professional networks, good health, and financial stability. So George's careful financial planning allowed him to retire voluntarily, which research shows leads to smoother adjustments and greater well-being. So he also volunteers regularly. So in addition to the job, he volunteers. So he's connecting to the busy ethic we discussed earlier. Maintaining purpose, structure, and social connection is a major protective factor in successful retirement. So George's case raises the question, which factors like savings, supportive relationships, and meaningful work help people thrive during retirement? And finally, we have the Wilsons, who recently moved from a suburban home into a continuing care retirement community, or a CCRC. This type of living arrangement offers a continuum of support. So from independent living to assisted living, like in all the care in between, all in one environment. They miss some aspects of independence, which is common during the transition, so they miss their home, but they value the built-in support in the community. I think it helped that the Wilsons came together, so rather than one of them alone. CCRCs are especially appealing for couples who want to remain together even if their care needs diverge in the future. So their decision reflects a blend of like factors: proactive planning, concerns about health, desire for social engagement, and possibly cultural or family values. So some cultures emphasize aging in place or multi-generational living, while others view CCRCs as a practical and positive option. The Wilson's case encourages us to think about how values, health, finances, excuse me, and cultural expectations influence the choices people make in later life.